Hi guys, it's Patrick here, Eggnog Poker. Just wanted to make a video today, really. Just going over a few things that I think people really need to go over, to be honest, in the games these days. I've done, it was a couple of years ago, I think it was at the end of 19, where I made a couple of videos. I got rid of them because I felt like they were out of date and they needed updating, really. A few things in there I didn't like and I wanted to change. So I made a new video today on how to beat micro stakes up to low stakes. Fundamentally Zoom, or like speed poker, however you want to look at it, on multiple sites, but using Zoom on stars as a main example and focus. Basically, I feel like a lot of people have been given wrong information. Maybe not necessarily wrong, but conflicting information. Like, you need to do one thing, like you need to focus really heavily on studying your ranges and focusing on GTO, doing tens and hundreds and thousands of hours over years to figure out how to play at a technical highest level. Whether you can apply it or not is a different thing. And then other people are a bit more focused on, what games you in, what can you do hand by hand, exploitatively, etc. Lots of different things, I guess. Basically, what I want to do is I want to give you a Bible, essentially. Call it a Bible? Maybe that's the wrong word for it. More of a list, a checklist. Checklist is good. There's lots of things that you can be doing in your games that, maybe you are, maybe you're not. Just things that you can think about and take with you. I reckon there's at least 5 things, if not more, in this list that you're absolutely not doing if you're stuck at stakes between, 2NL, 10NL, 25NL, 50NL, etc. that you're just absolutely not doing or not thinking about doing at a high enough level or consistent enough level in order to win. So let's just dive straight in, shall we? I'm going to try and make this video maybe 30 or 40 minutes, which is quite a long time. So pre-warning, if you want me to shut up, you're probably not going to get your wish. It's probably going to be a pretty boring video, I'm not going to lie. But I promise you, if you survive it, there'll be plenty of information to take in. So, just to think, as also at the end, we'll have some examples of hands as well to go over some of these bits and bobs that we're talking about. So it's not all boring. So first of all, I'm going to talk about mental game. So here, number 1. If you don't beat your games, admit it. Mental stability, mental strength. Admitting improvements are needed and focusing on your own faults and not the faults of others, so we can exploit them instead. That's a lot to take in. I feel like mental game is something that's not taken in and not used as a priority in almost any coaching that's ever out there. I mean, I'm not saying, coach with me and stuff. I'm not even promoting it at all. That's not something I'm looking to do from this. I just want to chuck my 2 cents out there, to be honest. But what I am saying is just, I think a lot of sites and a lot of places just forget that. I think a lot of people at micro stakes and low stakes, for whatever reason, they might have money or not money. They might just play for fun, whether they take it serious or not, what their means are, what they want out of the game. It's all very different, right? Generally, the only people who are very interested in putting loads and loads of time sink into learning how to get out of micro stakes tend to be 2 or 3 different types of personality. Not so much poker player, but personality. Like, for example, you get people who, and I would fall under this category, like frustrated, weaker players. So people that love the game, passionate about the game one way or another, but just can't beat it. We just can't. We're just not good enough to beat the game. What can we do? And then you get other people who are very smart people who just want to learn, but learn fast and gather the information, put it in, process it, and then away they go. I think a lot of people, especially at the micro stakes and low stakes, are these really frustrated weak players that just can't beat the game for whatever reason, whether they don't know how, whether they are very good but can't control, when they get frustrated, they get tilted, etc. I think a lot of people really need to understand that they're not winning players. They want to be, but they're not. And they can be, but in order to become a good player that can actually beat the games that they play, they need to admit that they can't for now. But then on the flip side of that, absolutely learn, or be at least willing to learn, how to beat the games. because that is the most important thing. I think a lot of other sites are just like boom, 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 boom. Here's your ranges. Here's your positions. These are your opening sizes. Focus on the people you're playing against. These are your c-bet sizes. Don't bluff too much. Don't pay the fish and the nits. Away you go. And, that's very vague and unfair on a lot of sites. There's some really good stuff out there. There's some fantastic, phenomenal stuff out there. But I'm just saying, for specifically micro and low stakes, I'm not talking about high levels, mid stakes, high stakes, etc. I'm talking about micro stakes, and specifically online micro stakes and low stakes. I think a lot of that forgets the main core issue, which is more mental problems. People just have an issue with losing. They may be really, really strong in life, may earn a lot of money, have a good family, have a good job, passionate about playing poker, but can't beat it. And that's really frustrating. I think a lot of other people also have that issue, but also don't know where to go and find out the answers. They don't know how to, what. Imagine being told, oh, well, if you want to learn the game, you have to go and study a solver. Well, what is a solver? What's going on with that? You don't even have to do that. It's ridiculous. I think the second point here, focusing on your own faults and not the faults of others, that is everything. Honestly, if you can just say, look, I know I have problems within the game. I'm not beating the games. I'm having issues. If you can admit that to yourself and keep admitting it every time, and also having an action plan where you move forward, that is so powerful. That is just going to immediately put you forward. I'm not saying it's going to absolutely correct everything, but it's going to absolutely jumpstart you forward. You need to mentally be prepared to lose in order to win. You need to not get frustrated and tilted. I mean, it's no one doesn't get frustrated, but you cannot get tilted. You cannot let people get to you. You cannot let losing sessions compound themselves and just turn you into a mental case and get really frustrated. Whether you need to go and find other people and talk to them through hands, whether you need to go and get coaching, whether you need to start studying solvers, whether you need to go through database and look through your hands. Let's be honest. This is a complex game. It's a difficult, complex game that involves money. It's always going to cause issues. Personally, I couldn't beat 2NL for years. I just couldn't do it. $2 game, couldn't do it. I would get frustrated. I would get angry. I was really ignorant. I thought I was really good. Thought I was fantastic. I thought I was the best. Couldn't beat the game. I couldn't understand why. And my ignorance of how to play the game, that matched with entitlement, put me in a spot where I couldn't figure out why I was losing. That ignorance would lead to frustration, bad plays, and then that would lead to frustration. And from frustration, that would then lead to just more bad plays, and it would just get worse and worse and worse. I didn't lose loads and loads and loads of money, but what I'm saying is, being a losing player is something that's not hard to admit. And, no one loses in this game, right? But another day. Moving on, just as important is learning your populations. Honestly, like if you're playing at, say, a home game live, okay, something completely different, and you're playing, 50p a pound, $1, $2, 3, 6, 5, 10, anything, any level. It's a home game, it's a private game. There's not many regulars there. It's mostly sort of fishy, recreational players. That population in that game is going to require a whole different set of skills than if you were playing like 200 Zoom. That 200 Zoom game is going to take a whole different set of skills to play a 2NL, which is a $2 Zoom game. And then those two Zoom games are going to take a whole different strategy to beat that live home game. I think people underestimate how much different games can be. I'm not saying me, I'm just saying in general. I could play a 500 1K game, right? 100,000 sit down. That could be against 5 of the other players in the world that are just absolutely best in the world, like Adamo, Chidwick, Limitless, whatever. But then I could play a 500 1K game, 100,000 sit down. I could be against 5 potatoes. The game would be different fundamentally. Like, you have to learn, like, if you're playing 2NL, 5NL, 10NL, 25, 50, all those populations are different one way or another but they still have the same fundamental weaknesses. It's just about how apparent they are and how common. I mean, honestly, like, if you can just really, really just take a step back and just start looking at how the populations are playing, just figure out how wide they're calling, figure out how wide they're going for value, if at all, and just exploit it. Every game, low to micro to low stakes, is all exploitation. You have to know your customer. I'm not saying person by person, but just population. You have to know how to get around these boys. Learning GTO and applying technical strategies above the rim, all the way up here, versus people who are 10 and L. It's not the best way to win. It's just not. Applying those strategies and ranges is great, but only within, your expected value is as high as your opponent's going to make it with the way they play. Their strategy may change the EV of your hands. So that's where we come into things like this. So, for example, a correct call, whatever that may be, may not be a correct call at this population. For example, if I play 100 Zoom, okay, it's still ridiculously tight beyond belief. But I can call there more confidently with, some of these like weaker top pairs, middling pairs, and other different types of scenarios where you can bluff catch and expect bluffs in a lot of situations, because against better players anyway, because they need bluffs in their range in order to even be profitable in the first place. And whereas if I was playing 2 and L, I wouldn't even be looking to have bluff catches, like, almost at all, within reason, but it's not part of the strategy. You see, the fundamental difference changes this completely based on these two different game types. If I'm playing a live game, for example, like a home game, like we said, like a 1-2, whatever, and it's full of drunk, crazy maniacs and whales and fishy regs and whatever, you're probably going to be bluff catching. You're not looking to bluff catch, but you're probably going to bluff catch a fair amount if they're going to be absolutely out to sea. Whereas on the flip side, if you're playing, say, 25 and L Zoom, the average regular and fish, they just have it a lot, because that's the only way they know how to win or break even, however you look at it. So looking to bluff catch would be very, very, very different in terms of EV. Do as much as you can to get away with. Do as much as you can. Do as much as you can get away with, if you can speak English, until people adapt. I honestly think this is one of the most important things to take away from today. You need to understand red line. And what I mean by red line is, if you're looking at a result graph, your blue line is money won on showdown or lost. Your green line is just fundamental currency earned, what you've won. And your red line is your non-showdown winnings. So this red line, if you really want to take the game seriously, you need to be looking at this, because you might go, talking about grass, talking about GTO. Honestly, like, if you're not passionate about the game and don't want to win and don't want to climb and whatever, don't listen to me. Don't look at this video. It's not for you. This is for people who want to learn. They want to listen. So here we go. You need to be looking at this red line. You need to be considering absolutely running these guys over. You cannot be calling down in weak marginal positions against tight players. You cannot do it. You need to change that strategy and flip it over and be turning millions of hands into bluffs, widening these ranges, like not calling people down in marginal. If you've got a marginal bluff catch, I would almost just not call ever. These people do not exploit in any level. You just cannot call. If you're doing loads of bluffing, you're only going to be getting called by the nuts, unless your bluffs are absolutely outrageous, like ridiculous, and people are starting to pick up on it. But even then, honestly, guys, there's no rule book when it comes to playing micro to low stakes. There really isn't. If your population is overfolding and they're not adapting to your aggression, like in any way, then why would you play tight? Honestly, why would you play tight? If these boys are constantly showing you the nuts, or really, really good hands, like 90% of the time, 80% of the time, whatever, when you're calling rivers with relatively strong hands that, bluff catches, and if you run it through a solver, it will go, you have to call, but they keep beating you, then stop calling. It's that simple. You're playing a 1-2 live game. How many fish or recreational players, regulars, whatever? How many people show you triple barrel bluff all ins at 1-2? You know, like, not many, if at all. We need to be looking for plays that people don't expect and are not used to. This is really important as well. I think a lot of people forget that they're playing against robotic games and robotic game types. So, for example, people are like, me have set, me check raise, me have top 2, me check raise, blah, blah, blah. Very, very simple ABC caveman. Me have aces, me have kings, me 3-bet. Yeah? And not many of these people are deviating where they're in the big blind and someone opens on the button and they've got king jack off. They don't even consider a 3-bet. They don't even know it's a thing. They're in the big blind, they've got queen 5 offsuit. They don't know that they can technically roll a 3-bet against the small blind open. It's not even a consideration. 90% of their range, more like 95% of their range, is a flat call anyway. So we need to absolutely be looking for different lines that they're not used to, so we can shake them up a bit. Get some calls where we may not have got calls before, and get loads of folds where we wouldn't have got folds before as well. So, for example, checking flops as the aggressor while we're being protected. Protected flop check is basically like, what's the simplest way of saying it? You open any position and someone defends. You don't see bet the flop. I think a lot of people at micro no stakes just assume that if an opponent checks after being the aggressor pre-flop or on the flop or whatever, if they eventually check, it's like it's like the universal sign for don't shoot. I give up. I surrender. Where in reality, check means check. I can check call. I can check raise. I can check fold. There's just different avenues and different strategies. It's not just I'm done. And I think a lot of people, especially at these stakes, that you can absolutely exploit is when these people are checking. Like, when you're the aggressor and you bet a street. So, for example, you got like a marginal top out, you can just check it back on the flop. Or you can bet the flop, check the turn, and then bet the river, for example. Check back the flop, raise the turn. You can do anything, right? That's for another day to start going through strategies, but absolutely look for things. You don't have to be super deceptive. If you're against a recreational player and you have a good hand, bet your good hands. Like, just, this is another thing I don't think that's actually on here, is when you're against recreational players and you have really good hands, do not trap. Do not slow play. Do not get fancy. Just put money in the middle. At the end of the day, your win rate is what your win rate is. It's determined by how many big blinds per 100 hands you're making. And if you are not making the maximum, inevitably you're going to be getting the maximum from the fish, not the regs. Then you're absolutely hurting yourself. You're getting carved up. You need to absolutely go for it when you have it. Also, things like flatting deceptively strong hands versus pre-flop versus nits. So, for example, if a nit, say like, what's a nit? Like a 13-5, 16-11, 18-10. I saw a 4-3-0 the other day. I didn't know that existed. But you can flat hands like ace king, king queen suited, ace queen suited. In a lot of positions, you actually do have them as flats. Again, strategy for another day. But you can keep their ranges wider pre-flop by not 3-betting correctly and instead just calling. So, I don't know, let's say I've got pocket queens on the button and UTG opens. You're actually supposed to flat there sometimes anyway, but taking my GTO hat off for a second and just putting on my fundamental one and exploitative one, I might just say, look, this guy's folding to 3-bets 90% of the time, which they do. They tend to have like an 80 to 90% fold to 3-bet most of the time, because they're opening and folding just everything because they're terrified. You don't want them to open ace jack off and fold. You want them to open ace jack and flop top pair, and you have an overpair, or you have a dominating top pair. So, for example, you might flat queens and it's a jack eye board against the ace jack. You might flat ace king, and you've got a dominating hand down the ace eye board against range. Things like that, that will win you a lot of money. Whereas if you 3-bet, that immediately puts them on the defensive. They only call with a really, really turtle shell range, and you don't really make a lot of money. It is what it is. I think these two come together. Overbetting for value versus regulars is absolutely going to underperform. And then on the flip side, overbetting as a bluff versus regulars, this is wrong, will overperform. So basically, I don't even think I think honestly, in a lot of positions when you're overbetting, we need to be overbetting as bluffs against most regulars and nits, because we're basically bottlenecking them into a situation where if we were trying to bluff and we need to fold equity, probably could have got away with it by doing 75% half pot, 3/4, full pot, etc. than an overbet most of the time. And we're risking more than we need to because they're overfolding in general. However, if you're in certain situations and you feel an overbet is necessary to get a fold, specifically a fold, overbetting performs far better than a normal, let's say 60 or 2/3, 75%, etc. sizing would, because people are just absolutely not interested versus overbets, and you'll find that their defending ranges versus overbets are basically sets, 2 pairs, and very, very, very strong top pairs, depending on what the hands are. Obviously, they can have combo draws, etc. But these boys are not messing about when they're calling you, so you can absolutely narrow their ranges down, and be very cautious on rivers if you overbet tens and get called. Next, I would say is don't tighten your ranges. You can actually widen them. So I think fundamentally people think, right, you're playing low stakes, play micro stakes. All you need to do is you just need to play a really, really solid, tight range, wait for good hands, bet the nuts, bet your value sizings, don't do it in, and you'll climb. Technically, yes, but it's just such a suboptimal way of playing. It's a very boring, it's not very effective. It's very, very slow, very, very sluggish, very, very cautious. And to be honest with you, it's just not... for someone who's a complete beginner, it's good because it teaches you how to confidently play the game at a basic level without doing it in, and you're learning things as you go. I think someone who's been playing for a long time and can't beat the game but needs to learn how to beat the game, you need to learn lag. You need to learn loose aggressive strategies. But I don't just mean raised draws or 3-bet pre with a few more hands. I mean, you need to fundamentally get the fuck in there and start blasting. You need rocket launches on rivers. Literally, you cannot wait for the nuts anymore, because there are not enough people that are going to pay. It's just a fact. So for example, when we're opening ranges, I'm not going to chuck ranges at you. This is not a strategy video, okay? But just things like having like UTG ranges that are wider, because fundamentally, if you're opening wider than you're supposed to, your population is supposed to be picking up on that and 3-betting you more, and bluffing you more because you're betting too many hands, you're raising too many hands, etc. But because they don't, it means again your weaker range that is like a marginal mixed open, I'll open it half the time, for example, becomes a pure open, because you're making more expected value EV from actually opening that than you should, because they're not exploiting it. Does that make sense? So you can absolutely start opening ranges like UTG, have your king 5 suited, things like that. You're generally playing a polarized strategy. I'm not going to get into it, but just generally, you're generally playing strong Broadway type holdings and really strong connecting holdings like 9-10, etc. And a lot of suited blocking properties. So like king 5 suited, ace 3 suited, king queen suited, etc. Really, really strong hands, nutted hands, and nutted blockers. Those are your main types of hands that you'll open UTG, and then you start widening as you go around. Again, for another day, but absolutely start widening your ranges up, start blasting, guys. Don't absolutely gospelize, if that's even a word, GTO for low-level gameplay. It's GTO. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm a GTO death lord, because I'm not. I studied them for a long, long time, and I'm getting better at them, and I'm starting to apply them, but we all make mistakes, and we're all at different levels. But generally, it's you're not playing against enough people who are playing at a high enough level to GTO. If you run, like, I'll take Wizard as an example, GTO Wizard, and you simulate versus GTO in a lot of situations, and you're learning, fundamentally you're learning what ranges to play and how to play them. That's brilliant. That's absolutely invaluable. But having 5-bet bluffing ranges pretty, for example, versus people who don't 3-bet bluff in the first place, 4 bets like kings. It's useless. You need to take, if you don't really start studying at all, then just learn how to play the game. Don't fuck about with learning how to do crazy stuff, because you're just gonna do it wrong, and you're just gonna hurt yourself more. So honestly, just don't say, oh, did I play that right? I'll go check. I'll go check that. So I'll solve that hand. Because the thing is, it's like you're playing against people who don't play properly. So all you need to do is just figure out how to exploit them, and that's not from a computer point of view. That's from just, I've got a potato here. How do I exploit this potato? Is he an aggressive potato? Is he a tight potato? You see? We need to start looking for way more folds and way more bluffs. We need to absolutely be murdering these people. Every time we have a situation where we can bluff, we need to overbluff. Every time we've got a situation where it's a marginal calling spot, we need to start overfolding, guys. Like, we cannot be calling down these light spots. You just can't do it. Honestly, like, I don't want to just keep talking, because I know I'm rambling and on we go, but it's really important. It's so important. These examples in 10-15 minutes time or whatever, I'll show you, but you need to absolutely stop these marginal cooldowns, and you need to absolutely be finding bluffs, more check raise bluffs, etc. Moving on, check raise everything, semi bluff everything, controller's power as people overfold and undercall, and underbluff as well. This is important because basically these populations in all levels up to say mid stakes, it's just the same regurgitated shit over and over again. Excuse my language, it's just a fact. You need to be finding, I promise you, if you're stuck at micro stakes, you're stuck at low stakes, I guarantee you that you're not check raise bluffing enough. You're just not. The nut flush draw doesn't count. You need to be finding blockers to bluff with. You need to be finding backdoor equity to bluff with. If you've got an RNG, like a little number generator, get it in, because you need to be finding. You're not doing it for the learning frequencies and GTOing, but what you're doing is you can just say, oh, well, it's a high roll, or this time I'm gonna look at my watch, and if it's if it's a high number that the second hand is on, then I'm gonna be more aggressive this time. Do you see what I'm saying? Anything, find a reason, but you need to absolutely be blasting these people. Over bluff and over fold. We've gone over red line over blue line. So blue line is your winnings on showdown, wins or losses, and red line is your winnings or losses without showdown. So for example, if I make you fold, that's a red line win. If I bet and you call me and I win, that's a blue line win. And up and down we go. You need to be finding incentives to keep bluffing and keep folding. You need to absolutely get away from hands, and you absolutely turn hands into bluffs. We'll show you in a minute. If you're ever unsure, just fold. Honestly, like just have this as a line. It's so important. It's just fold, guys. Do not pay these people. They are sitting, they are waiting, they're getting annihilated by rake. They're not getting, do not pay them. If you have a HUD, obviously you've got your PFR, your VPIP, 3bet, etc. It's 2022. If you don't know what HUD is, away you go by now. But I'm not saying you need a HUD, especially not low stakes. But if you have it and you play the games regularly, you will accumulate information. Look at WTSD and W%, WTSD, blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? How many times your opponent is going to showdown? How many times they're c-betting river, how many times they're winning on showdown, how many times they're getting to the showdown, etc. You can start to figure out, look, this guy's betting a lot of flops, turns, and rivers. He's getting to the river a lot, and he's losing a lot on showdown. Whereas you might have a guy who's not betting rivers but gets to showdown a lot and loses a lot. Well, he's a light calling station. If you've got someone who doesn't bet very often, doesn't get to showdown very often, but wins a lot on showdown, these are very, very tight players that are waiting for really good hands. You can really, really dissect that and figure out what kind of position you're in when you're thinking about making a call or a fold or a bluff. Trap everything possible is a bit hard, because I've already said you don't want to trap good hands against recreationals. Against nits, you do. And against these sort of tighter regular players, you really do. You want to underrepresent hands. it's not so much of a deception all the time. It's just, I don't know how to say it, because the thing is, like, deception is the part of the strategy. But the thing is, it's like you're not trying to be strategized. You're just trying to mix things up. You kind of want them to go, well, you've given me the opportunity to bluff, so I'll bluff. Excellent, I'll make some money from that. Rather than just betting and betting and betting and trying to just win the pot. Just a rule though, if you're against a recreational and you have a good hand, do not trap. Just put money in. Simplify every spot if possible. So for example, like c-betting, you might have multiple c-betting sizes on different boards. Simplify means we might say, right, I'm going to simplify my strategy and I'm going to either bet 3/4 or check. I'm going to bet a third or check, for example, rather than having 5, 10, 15 different sizes and building a strategy. GTO hat on. You can simplify, because your population, I guarantee, will not be bluffing you enough. They won't be check raising you wide enough. They won't be coming after you, and they'll absolutely be overfolding to your c-bets. So just c-bet very often. Just be careful not to do it, I would say 80-90% of the time. Maybe more like 70-75. Just because people might exploit that. If they see that you're c-betting like 90% of the time, that is something that might get exploited. But it's still, again, if you're playing micro stakes, it probably isn't, to be honest. Just as a generalization, against fish, we want to be blasting with good hands and not bluffing them too hard unless you know that they're going to fold like tight fish. Leading can also be good. So for example, if the board's like monotone, like 3 to a flush, you flop a set, you're in a single raise pot or a 3-bet pot out position as not as the aggressor. Instead of check raising, you can also lead. It does throw them off a bit, and it might entice some bluffs. And if they have a hand that they want to protect, they might just spaz out, and that's always nice. Against the nits, we can underplay big hands, pre-flop and post-flop, and we can turn a lot of marginal hands into bluffs. And as it says, fuck these guys. Really, these nits are an embarrassment to our game. We just need to not avoid them, but just learn how to pick apart bits from them, trap them here and there, make them think they're ahead most of the time when they're not, and just do what we can. Just do not pay them. If you don't pay these guys, they get annihilated by rake. That's fulfilling enough. Almost done. The better the player, the more GTO orientated we can be. This is only something, I'll be honest with you. I mean, again, I'm expecting most of the people in this video that don't even study GTO at all. You don't need to study GTO. But what I'm saying is, the weaker the player you're against, the more you need to dumb it down like a child. The better the player, the more you can go on the opposite side and be more strategic. It doesn't have to be GTO. It's just, I know I can have more bluffs against a player who's thinking. I know I have to have some bluff catches against someone who might be good enough to find bluffs. Whereas if you're against a child, and a child doesn't really know what they're doing, they're very volatile, you're better off generally playing quite straightforward. If you can find a whale, well done, because I don't know where they are anymore. I think they're dead. And finally, just something to take. Average guys don't know what the fuck is going on, so why play the game like you think they do? Just, if you're playing like there's streamers, there's videos out there where people are like, hey, look, I'm gonna replicate all this GTO at 10 and L. It's heartbreaking, because it's just it's like, why do you need to exploitatively you can do a lot of stuff that you can implement with GTO as well, but it's just wrong. It's just a wrong approach. You just leave so much money on the table, and you put yourself in so many weird spots that just aren't optimal. It's ridiculous. Just treat everyone like an idiot, honestly. Just give them no credit. Just blast the cunts down. Excuse my language, but just blast them. Like, do not call them, but absolutely bluff them. Just go berserk. The last point, and then we'll do some videos, is bluff requirements. So I keep saying, again, this isn't a strategic video, but Pat, you keep saying bluff. Bluff. But I don't know how to bluff. I'm a losing player. What can I do? I don't beat the games. I'm not just going to start 3-betting king 3 offsuit, and then what do I do then? Well, that's where you need to learn. But I can give you some requirements, okay? So if you're going to bluff, just a few tips, okay? This will at least help. Think about the range in which you're doing it, and what hands and properties your cards are holding. So for example, you need to try, if you can, and block the opponent's calling range. If you're going to bluff with a hand, you need to make sure that you're not blocking So that you are attempting to block the hands that they might well call you down with. Like, you know, if king queen makes a straight, a good bluffing property would have a king or a queen in it, right? Your hand may not be good enough to call, but it can absolutely be good enough to bluff with. So, for example, in the video we'll show in a moment, middle pair, bottom pair, under pairs, straight blockers, flush blockers, nut flush blockers are quite good ones, for example. As long as they're not strong showdown value, like ace king high, ace queen high, etc. We need to, on the opposite side, unblock folds. So, for example, it's the same thing, but just the other way around, I suppose. You want to make sure that in your hand, you want to block their calling range, but you also want to make sure that you're unblocking their folding range. If their folding range contains a lot of spades, for example, you don't want 2 spades in your hand, especially big ones, which is quite important. I know, we're not talking about strategy and GTO here. Why are you going on about blockers? Mathematically, it is important when you're thinking about fold ranges. If you've got hands, if all of your bluffs contain cards that have the wrong removal and reverse blocking and unblocking properties, then most of your bluffs just mathematically will not work compared to how much more they may work if they do. It's just a fact. Range and nut advantages is thrown around really poorly. I think a lot of people assume a range advantage because a board is a certain texture, whereas the whole range might be absolutely massive, and the opponent's range might be very narrow, but they still assume they have a range advantage, but they don't. This gets thrown around ridiculously badly. But just as a thing, if you're bluffing someone and the boards are they look scary, so that, you know, they generally, you know, you're the aggressor and the board's like king 5, ace 7 3 rainbow, you know, the boards are more scary, or they look more scary to your opponent. Also, for example, like monotone flops and turns, 4 straights, etc. You know, those are scary. So you may not have a range or a nut advantage in some spots, but you still have, you know, the appearance of a scary hand. At least it's something to use as well. It does also, you can think about how often your opponents are folding as well. Like, if you know that your opponent's absolutely overfolding, it's just so valuable to just have more, like, you can just turn anything at that point into a bluff and just profitably print money. Finally, also, how low are we in our range? For example, if you have 6 high, even if you're blocking the flushes, flush draws, whatever, it's irrelevant. If you have 6 high, then you're bottom of range. The worst hand you have generally is more of a rule of thumb to bluff with compared to having a good hand. So, taking a minute. That's that with the information I've put here. 37 minutes of me blabbing. You've done very well if you've got here. I hope that's been helpful. I've got a few examples now that'll take a couple of minutes and then we'll be done. I thought might be interesting. So let's have a look. So let's maximize this a little bit. We've got some hands here. I'm going to play it through and talk through. So we've got an open from the button. We roll a defend in the big blind, and we get here with the king high. Not leaning the flop. Decide to check. Opponent villain checks back. The ace is pretty decent for both ranges, but far better for the button as the aggressor in a single raise. Check to them, and here we are. Our hand performs quite well as a check raise. Also with a club, if we had the king of clubs, we might consider some calls, but not to get too GTO hat orientated. Our hand will perform very well as a bluff. So, for example, having a check raise here is something we can absolutely be starting to look at. So, for example, our villains bet quite large here as well, which actually decentivizes us to bluff in theory. But we're not playing GTO hat off, exploit hat back on. We just know we're blocking a lot of our opponent's strongest calling range, and we absolutely can force him to overfold. And then we can blast a lot of rivers, including club rivers, with this jack of clubs. Check raising it called, we're not thrilled. However, the river's pretty decent. We've now rivered second pair. At this point, we do beat some hands, and we can get value from some hands as well. So depending on what we want to do, we would generally check here. Because there's no turning this hand into a bluff now doesn't make too much sense. We want to try and get to showdown. However, what's interesting is villain finds a half pot sizing here. This is a bit exploitative and a little bit saley, but this is a good candidate to then river shove because we block ace jack, block ace jack, sorry. We block ace king. We block the main straight, which is jack 10. So block, I mean, I dare say kings, but I don't think our villain has kings on a 50 now pool that checks back the flop on a flush draw board. Basically, we're just going to say we've got a straight blocker, we've got some of your strongest calling range like king, queen, ace, jack, jack 10, etc. blocked. We can absolutely then turn that into a double check raise river jam. A bit saily, but it's in there. I mean, I don't want to use these as examples because they've worked, but I can really promise you that these absolutely work far better than they should do in reality in these games. Moving on now, 10-9 suited. What happens here? Cut off open. We flat the button. You can find flats even in a high rake environment. I wouldn't suggest it in the small blind. I would mainly suggest it just on the button. And also, I think I'm mainly flatting against recreational players as well. Folds around and we're heads up. Villain bets about 2/3. We find a call. Fine, pretty standard. Nothing really crazy going on. Against double barrel, this is a spot where you now need to start considering overfolding, depending on population and your player. If you've got a tight regular here, I would just overfold turn. I wouldn't even consider calling with second pair on blocking hearts, and not interested. Against recreationals and crazy players and some of the better players, I've just using this as an example. I've just picked out hands from my HUD, from my database. We start to then have more calls that might become more standardized. This is the only river that is a little bit dicey because the villain's range can improve. Like, for example, king queen, ace. I don't think ace queen bets river, but can have hands like king queen, pocket queens. But I don't think pocket queens double barrels turn. A villain can also have ace jack and jack 9, which sucks. But we have a 9 blocker, so we're representing jack 9, and we block jack 9. But it would be nice to have at least a jack, if not an ace. And we do also block a set of 10s. We block king 10. We block queen 10. So again, we can find these raises. Again, not the best property. I prefer to have a jack or an ace, but another victory. So we've got a different one here where we actually have a value hand. We're not bluffing this time. But what we do versus population and also within GTO, we can absolutely find some aggressive lines. So for example, small blind opens, we 3-bet the queen 8 off in case you are going, what's going on? Queen 8 offsuit here is an aggressive action about half the time in the big blind. Small blind defends, and here we are. So we flop trip 8s. Nothing crazy to say. Opponent checks. Just play a protected check back this time. 6 of spades, villain leads, and now we can absolutely start blasting. Now we can start representing, obviously we have it, but had we checked back other different holdings like ace 10 of spades, for example, this might be a reasonable candidate for a raise sometimes. So we're absolutely going to start pumping money in now. Find the call. Villain then blocks 10%. I'm not too thrilled with this. I think villain should just be checking at this point. Checking back the flop, raising the turn. This might have been in the juice. I don't know what this was at the time, but we're just shoving for clear value. Looking to get called by all these nutted jack X, worse queen X, etc. Some decent pairs as well. And we get called by worse. But we may not have got 3 streets in a call from this guy had we played it differently. So, you know, different ways to play hands can induce mistakes from villains as well, rather than just sort of blasting the same way. What do we have here with the queen jack? Open the queen jack, face a defend from the big blinds. This is the last example, and then we're done. Villain checks, and we decide to check back this time. So this is obviously we don't get, you know, this is a pretty easy check back. We do bet sometimes as well, but we do primarily check back. Not going to go super crazy into it, but I'm just saying, you know, when we said these like protected check backs, like marginal holdings as well, we don't really want to pile loads and loads of money in, and we can induce mistakes as well. Now we induce a bet from our opponent. We're not thrilled, we're not upset, we just play a call, nice and easy.
And then we river straight, happy days. We're only losing to, ace queen. That didn't 3-bet pre, so we basically have the nuts. Hard to get called by worse, though, to raise. Villain does bet, and they size up about 3/4. You could technically find a raise here, and you probably should in GTO, but fundamentally, this guy's representing a total bluff or a queen. So, only call. And then we show the villain's bluff. So, nothing else to say, really. We've induced this bluff by checking back. I know this is a marginal hand, but I'm just saying, like, if we had a hand like King 5 suited, that might play the same way. Another good example. So yeah, there it is. Hopefully that you've taken something from this. I've been blabbering on for 45 minutes. I do apologize. I just think there's a lot to the game that a lot of people haven't really put through, like the mental game and learning populations, and maybe it has been, maybe it hasn't been. But I just wanted to give my 2 cents really, as well as just showing you what I think. So tell me in the comments if you agree with this or don't agree. Let me know, and we'll go from there. So see you later, guys. Have a good one, and we'll speak soon.